You want to know something that I've noticed recently? And this is one of those things where once you see it, you really can't unsee it. Cereal aisles have become boring. I remember as a kid walking through these sections at the grocery store, and it was like every other box was screaming at you saying that there was a chance for you to get a free toy that's bundled inside, but now it's just nothing. I thought at first this was because the 3 grocery stores that I alternate between in my area just suck and have lost their whimsy, but after a quick Google search, it turns out that this is a widely reported thing. Since the 2010s, this marketing gimmick has been slowly fading away, largely due to health and ethical concerns. If there is some kind of a surprise packaged with your cereal these days, it's usually placed behind a QR code you have to scan that'll take you to some URL or mobile app. Gone are the days where you'd be pouring your cereal into a bowl and some crappy plastic figurine would plop out. Or better yet, maybe even a video game. Back in the 90s, that is how some kids would get their hands on the humongous entertainment point-and-click adventures. Roller Coaster Tycoon was also distributed this way as well, but supposedly the originator of this whole serial video game marketing gimmick was Chex Quest, released in 1996. Chex Quest is interesting for a bunch of different reasons that I'll be going into shortly. The game was conceptualized by the original owners of Chex cereal, Ralston, as an attempt to reinvigorate the Chex brand. They contracted an indie multimedia company, Digital Cafe, to work on the project, which would end up becoming the very first video game the company would ever develop. It was a bit of a daunting task for Digital Cafe, with them only having a team of roughly 6 members and a tight deadline of 6 months. The longest they've ever been given on any project, but of course this wouldn't be enough to develop a fully fledged game. Originally, Ralston envisioned Chex Quest to be a sort of ghost hunting game that was supposed to teach kids about nutrition, since they were very dead set on this game being educational and child-friendly. Though the owner of Digital Cafe, Dean Hires, had little faith in this original concept. If this was how Ralston wanted to reinvigorate the Chex cereal brand, they were going about it all wrong. 2 members, Charles Jacoby and Scott Holman, both had prior experience in modding Doom, so they suggested maybe basing Chex Quest off of that and using Doom's engine, id Tech 1. That idea was very quickly shot down though, as the higher-ups of Digital Cafe thought it would cost like $500,000 to obtain the license to use id Tech 1. But after reaching out to id Software about a week later, it turns out id were very willing to cut Digital Cafe a very affordable deal. Mainly because Chex Quest wasn't going to be following a traditional gaming revenue model, with it being exclusively distributed in cereal boxes. But also because Quake was becoming the hot new thing on the market, so id had little interest in the old and outdated technology of Doom 1. So with a 6-month deadline, a small team that had almost no experience in game development and a shoestring budget, how did Chex Quest ultimately come out? Well, here's the thing. Chex Quest isn't a game built entirely from scratch that's running on the Doom engine. It's actually just Doom with a different coat of paint. It's essentially what some might call a total conversion mod. In fact, if you crack open the game's WAD file, you can still find all sorts of leftover unused assets. My favorite and wildest example of this that I was able to find is the end screen for Doom's 3rd episode, which shows Daisy's severed head skewered on a pike. Yeah, and this is hidden in a game that was targeted for kids ages 8 to 10. Others have already pointed this out too, but given that Chex Quest mostly makes aesthetic changes, with a little bit of tweaking, you can get mods like Brutal Doom to work with it. It's kinda weird to talk about Chex Quest for this reason, because so much of it is built directly on top of the bones of Doom, yet it still somehow manages to make itself seem like its own standalone game. The fact that the 5 levels here are completely new and not just simple recreations definitely helps Chex Quest stand apart. The inclusion of a story and this crudely animated intro cinematic also helps too, even though it's just a child-friendly take on Doom's story. On a distant planet called Bezoik, all hell breaks loose and there's an infestation of these extra-dimensional cereal-eating booger beings known as phlegmoids, that just so happen to be immune to any and all conventional weapons. So the only way to dispose of them is to teleport them back to their home dimension with these special Zorch weapons. The character you play as, the Chex Warrior, volunteers to deal with this growing phlegmoid infestation and rescue the hapless citizens of Bezoik. You've got an entire arsenal of these Zorch weapons to collect, which, as you can probably already guess by now, they're literally just reskinned versions of Doom's weapons. You've got the Mini Zorcher replacing the pistol, the Large Zorcher replacing the shotgun, Rapid Zorcher replacing the chain gun, Zorch Propulsor replacing the rocket launcher, Phasing Zorcher replacing the plasma gun, and the Large Area Zorching device replacing the BFG. Then you've also got your melee weapons, the Boot Spoon and the Super Boot Spork. But despite all of that, these weapons still feel totally unique. It's crazy how a few simple sprite reworks, new sound effects, and a new context can make you perceive things so differently. Rarely have I ever reminded myself of the fact that I'm just using a shotgun. No, it's the large Zorcher, it's a completely different thing. Kinda. Not really. It's worth noting that the original concepts for the Zorch weapons show that they were supposed to be more ray gun-like at first, though it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that these were rejected in favor of these more inoffensive TV remote-looking gizmos. The health pickups have also been replaced with healthy foods, and seriously, you don't ever need to worry about running low on health or ammo because there is an overabundance of this stuff in every level. In fact, that entire weapon roster that I just listed, as powerful as it is in Doom, you could safely ignore like 90% of it here. I'm not kidding when I say you could easily beat this game with just the large Zorcher and the super boot sport. Using anything else is absolutely overkill since most of the enemies you'll be going up against are just low-level grunts, like Phlemoidus communis, which, as the name implies, is the most common enemy, and it also hardly ever hits you. Unless you're low on ammo or dealing with the rare, exceptionally large horde of Phlemoids, you really don't need to be switching to your other weapons that often. I thought maybe the hardest difficulty, Super Slimy, would push me to use more of my arsenal, and it kinda did, but surprisingly I was still able to get through this entire thing without breaking much of a sweat, which isn't really all that impressive when you think about it because this is a kid's game. At the end of the day, I don't have much of a problem with this because I know I'm not at all a part of this game's intended demographic. I only bring it up as something to be mindful of for those who still haven't played this game, which was released almost 3 decades ago. There is one problem, however, that does irk me a little bit about Chex Quest, and that is the level design. It's weird. There's certain moments where things that you need in order to progress further into the level are tucked away in a spot that you would not expect them to be in. Like, I always find it strange how in the level Arboretum, the blue key is placed in this little side room, instead of this larger hub area that it's right next to that has literally nothing in it besides a crowd of Phlemoids. It's just like, what's the point of making a room this big and filling it with enemies when there's not really much of a reason for you to go in it in the first place? Then the last level, Caverns of Bezoik, threw me for a giant loop. The level starts off with 3 different paths, 2 of which have a red door and a blue door, and the other has a yellow key. But there's no yellow door that's readily apparent to you, so where do you go? Well, there's a pit with a teleporter at the bottom. You go in through one side, it takes you back up to the top, but if you go in through the other side, it'll take you to the blue key. I played this level for like half an hour running around in circles because I was just so lost. I assumed that these 2 teleporters were the same. Am I stupid for thinking that? Probably. But I literally found a secret that gives you an extra yellow key for some unknown reason, and then it just takes you straight to the final boss. I found this before I figured out how to properly play through this level. And that's another thing. The secrets in this game are downright bizarre, and I haven't heard anyone bring this up yet. Some of them are really cool, like if you want to get your hands on the Laz device, you gotta enter this cleverly hidden room that's got portraits of all the Digital Cafe members. But then there's the one in Laboratory, which is just a room with nothing in it besides a teleporter that takes you back to the starting area. Am I missing something? Is my game broken? I'm confused. Then there's secrets you can't even avoid, like you walk straight into them because you're just playing through the level normally. I'm willing to cut Digital Cafe some slack on all of this though. This was their very first game after all, and honestly given their circumstances, what they've managed to accomplish is very impressive. Some of these levels have a few little hiccups, but I wouldn't say any of them are anywhere near being atrocious or even just plain bad. And apart from that, I really have nothing else to complain about. Chex Quest is fun, it's simple, it's Doom, you really can't go wrong with any of it. It was also unbelievably successful. With how little money went into the production of this, even the manufacturing costs for the CDs were covered by AOL with their tie-in bonus that included 50 free hours of their service. Chex Quest sold like hotcakes. In just the span of 6 weeks, 6 million copies were sold and boosted the sales of Chex cereal by 295%. It's staggering, but not at all surprising when you think about it. Doom was also insanely popular, but with how violent and controversial it was, most parents were hesitant to buy it for their kids. Chex Quest came in as a much-needed substitute for those kids who were jonesing to blast away some demons to some MIDI heavy metal. Chex Quest definitely didn't hold a candle to Doom, but when it was your only option, it was good enough, and you better savor every goddamn minute of it. With how successful it was, Ralston couldn't just walk away from this money machine. A sequel had to be made. Chex Quest 2, Terror in Chex City was released not long after the first episode, and unlike its predecessor, it wasn't stuffed into cereal boxes, but rather available to download for free on the Chex Quest website. Chex Quest 2 was developed in an even shorter amount of time than the first, something that Jacoby claimed to have harmed the game as most of it was rushed to completion. And yeah, there's certain things about this episode that I do agree do seem a bit undercooked, but for the most part, I honestly like Chex Quest 2 more than the first. The levels are vastly more interesting, with them being set in the urban environments of Chex City. You've got levels taking place in a movie theater, apartment complexes, and my personal favorite, a museum. The amount of detail and decoration that's put into these levels, it's akin to something like Duke Nukem or Blood. Doom is mostly lacking when it comes to dressing up its levels like this. Doom 2 was a little better, but compare these two side by side and the difference is apples and bowling balls, my friend. And I couldn't help but notice the soundtrack this time around. I don't know what it is with these kid-friendly imitations of violent first-person shooters having tracks that are genuine bangers. No lie, this and Super Noah's Ark 3D give their original counterparts a run for their money. Just give it a quick listen. Chex Quest 2 is also a little tougher than its predecessor. Not by a whole lot, but I feel like they didn't really hold themselves back as much when it comes to throwing larger and more varied crowds of enemies at the player. There were a few moments where I had to actually swap out the large Zorcher to the phaser or the rapid fire because it felt like I was only chipping away at the Phlegmoid horde. Speaking of which, there are two new enemies here. Well, actually, they're not that new, but there's these Phlegmoid larvas, or as I like to call them, the Phlegmworms. These little guys replace the Pinkies, which in Chex Quest 1 were replaced by the Phlegmoidus Cycloptus. It's a little confusing, I know. The same goes for the Phlegmoidus Quadrumpus. Don't let their massive size scare you, because deep down inside, these guys are just imps, which in the previous episode were replaced by the armored Phlegmoids. Both the Phlegmworms and the Quadrumpus pop up way more frequently throughout this episode, and it's a nice change of pace. On their own, they're not really that intimidating, but in large numbers they can and will sponge up a lot of your ammo. I like how they didn't just recycle enemies from the previous episode, and they actually redesigned some of them. It might seem a little unnecessary at first, but to me it's another thing that helps Chex Quest feel like its own standalone game. You don't really think about the fact that these two things are just Pinkies, you simply accept them as two separate and unique enemies. Okay, so what are these stinky bits of Chex Quest 2? Alright, well, even though I gushed about the levels being visually impressive earlier, I will say that in terms of their layouts, there hasn't really been much improvement in this department from Chex Quest 1. The levels can still feel a little confusing to navigate through. Cinema and City Streets are the two levels that immediately come to mind when it comes to this. They don't flow in this neat and organized way. As you pick up keys, you find yourself constantly pacing back and forth throughout the map to their corresponding doors because everything is just scattered about with seemingly no rhyme or reason. But again, I'm still willing to forgive Chex Quest 2 here. These levels can be a bit flawed, but as a whole, the game still manages to be consistently fun and enjoyable from start to finish. And the other improvements that I listed definitely make up for any shortcomings. Let's also not forget that this was developed under an even tighter deadline than the first episode. Chex Quest 2 wraps up with a fight against two Phlegmoidus Maximuses, another new, yet also not so new enemy that replaces the Barons of Hell. I should mention that the boss from the previous episode, the Phlegmbrain, was also a disguised Baron of Hell, but programmed in a way that prevented it from moving around. Here's a little tip for this boss fight. You can skip it completely by going up to this waterfall that the Maximuses are standing in front of. Doing this will teleport you to a room filled with Phlegmworms and a code written on the wall. What is this code for, you might be asking? Well, back in the day, if you went to the Chex Quest website, you could put this code in to get a coupon allowing you to buy a box of Chex cereal at a discounted price. The episode finally comes to a close with the game asking you if you're ready for the next mission. And that's funny considering the fact that this is the last Chex Quest game. Yep, not only did the Chex Quest promotional campaign end sometime shortly after 2's release, but Ralston also ended up selling the Chex cereal brand to General Mills for $570 million. Ralston wasn't really struggling as a food company. Even in the cereal market, they weren't doing too bad. At one point, they were ranked 5th in biggest cereal companies in the US, but when you're going up against a Goliath like Kellogg's, it's an uphill battle that you're just not going to win no matter how much money you throw at it, thus leading to the deal with Ralston's other biggest competitor, General Mills. After this, it seems like Chex Quest 1 and 2 were scrubbed off the internet, with them only being available on various preservation sites. It was unfortunate, but the legacy that Chex Quest left behind and its impact on the cereal industry was not forgotten. Both video game and cereal companies were working hand in hand with one another to capture that lightning in a bottle situation that Chex Quest created. Some companies even tried doing exactly what Ralston and Digital Cafe did. Like Quaker Oats with Captain Crunch's Crunchling Adventures, developed by Cobalt Interactive and released in 1999. It was a pet-raising simulation type of thing where there's a bunch of mini-games that you play with your disgusting little Crunchling gremlin creature. It was a fun and cute idea, I guess, but obviously a little unexciting compared to Chex Quest. The fans wanted more, and the only way they knew how to satiate their hunger was to start modding. A bunch of Chex Quest mods were popping up left, right, and center. Some fans were even trying to make their own third episode, but the most notable of these mods is Ultimate Chex Quest by Boingo the Clown. This mod aims to revamp all 5 levels from both Chex Quest 1 and 2, as well as eventually adding in 2 new episodes. Ultimate Chex Quest gained so much popularity that it eventually caught the eye of Charles Jacoby, who was not only impressed by the amount of effort that was being put into this project, but also felt motivated by the strong community that Chex Quest managed to cultivate. Because of this, Jacoby decided to begin work on Chex Quest 3. Now, it's worth noting that Digital Cafe shut their doors around 1998, but Jacoby did reach out to former member Scott Holman to help with the project. And on September 8th, 2008, the long-awaited Chex Quest 3 finally dropped. Not as some kind of a marketing stunt for Chex cereal, but simply as a huge thank you to the dedicated fanbase. And my god, let me just say that Chex Quest 3 is damn near perfect. Not only does this include the previous 2 episodes with significant improvements made to certain levels, but it does also include the final 3rd episode, Invasion, which many fans have noted for being much darker than the previous 2. Jacoby would later explain that this tonal shift was unintentional and that he was only trying to make the episode feel grander, which is closer to the vibe I got from first impressions. What I like so much about Chex Quest 3 is that I feel like it understands its player base. It's not trying to cater to new kids again, it's trying to appeal to the kids who grew up with Chex Quest, the people who already have experience with and a personal attachment to the original games. And that's made evident by the fact that this episode is so much harder than the previous 2. Like, it doesn't even waste your time. The first level already introduces you to the Cacodemon replacement, the Super Cycloptus. Later on, you're introduced to the Phlegmoides Stridicus, or as I like to call them, the Phlegmlegs, because they got long legs. These guys are yet another replacement for the Pinkies, but I think they're slightly modified. They seem to be more tankier than the Phlegmworms or the regular Cyclopti, and they seem to be faster too, making them a little harder to hit, and they're almost always in your face. I like to conserve my ammo as best I can in this episode because both of these guys pop up quite a bit, especially the Phlegmlegs. I'd also like to bring up the soundtrack yet again because Jesus Christ, for a game that's about cereal, it goes way too hard. Some of the tracks here do such an excellent job reminding you just how grand this episode is supposed to feel. They're climactic, energetic, and they sound like they're supposed to be the ultimate swan song to the Chex Quest saga. Just give it another listen. The levels are equally just as beautiful, and the level design issues that were present in the last 2 episodes are pretty much gone here. These are all very solid levels. I also love how E3M3 randomly just plops you into a Greek-styled villa. It makes no sense considering that the last 2 levels were set in these government buildings, but it's whatever, I really don't care, I'm all for it. Quite frankly, I don't think there's enough boomer shooters on the market that do this sort of thing. The level ends in a fight with the Phlegmbomination. It's actually a really easy boss, it only takes a few shots from the last device to take down. And this brings us to the end of Chex Quest 3. Oh shit, we're still going. Provincial Park, another level taking place in an unusual location. This one is in a national park of all things. Hopefully you have a good bit of ammo on you because this level is packed with the meanest, greenest bastards this episode can throw at you. Phlegmlegs, Super Cyclopti, Lost Souls, oh god no. Why are there so many of them? Then the last level has you venturing through the Phlegmoid Mothership. A giant gauntlet of every enemy you've been introduced to, all leading up to the final fight with Lord Snotfulus. For how tough this level is, this boss is another massive pushover. Just blast him a few times with the last device and he's gone. But that does truly bring us to the end of Chex Quest 3. For a while, people were asking about the possibility of a Chex Quest 4, and Jacoby has stated that he's not really interested in doing that. And you know what? That's fine with me. Chex Quest 3 is one of the most satisfying conclusions to a trilogy that I have ever played. I'm serious, in every conceivable way it is a colossal step up from the previous 2 episodes. It has the right amount of challenge, the level design is on point, and the soundtrack has absolutely no right to be as amazing as it is. I can't imagine there being another episode that somehow manages to top this, and I'm glad because honestly I am completely Chexed out. I've had my fill and I just don't think I could stomach any more of this stuff. Alright, so on May 18th, 2020, Chex Quest HD dropped, a remake of the first episode that was done using Unreal Engine 4, and it does try to make the most of what the engine is capable of. A lot of the levels here were rebuilt, like storage facility having a bit more verticality and platforming. Arboretum looks way more interesting now, having this whole outside garden area with even the phlegmworms from episode 2 making an appearance. But that's about where my praises for this game abruptly come to an end. Yeah, I don't like Chex Quest HD. Especially after playing the original episodes, Chex Quest HD is disappointing in a lot of ways. For starters, all of the enemies here move and act like they're half asleep. They are unbelievably slow, and most of the time they don't even care if you shoot them, they'll just stand there and take it. Making this game so much easier than the original first episode. Something that I could maybe tolerate if there were some difficulty options, but oh yeah, I forgot there aren't any. They gave the Chex Warrior a voice, and he'll frequently spout out lines that quite frankly are like Bubsy levels of bad.
This key will be useful for opening doors. Now where is a blue door?
While we're still on the topic of the Chex Warrior, who by the way is now called Fred Chexter, there are 5 other characters you can play as, all based off of pieces you could find in a bag of Chex Mix, because this game was promoting that snack product. Originally, I think you were supposed to unlock these characters by buying a specially marked bag of Chex Mix and applying a code, but I got this game roughly around the time of its release. I have not bought a single bag of Chex Mix from then until now, and yet I have all of these characters. So that kinda tells you how well this promotional campaign went. None of these characters really shake up the gameplay in any meaningful way, they just change the dialogue and 2 cutscenes. And finally, apart from the Phlegmworm cameo, episode 2 is completely forgotten about here. I feel bad for being so harsh on Chex Quest HD, especially since the last 3 games were so great, so I'd like to think there's maybe another side to this that I'm not seeing. Both episodes 1 and 2 were developed under circumstances that were not ideal, so maybe that's the case here. And after I did a little bit of digging, it all makes sense now. Chex Quest HD initially started off as a little passion project. Jacoby began tinkering with Unreal Engine 4 and just for the fun of it decided to recreate Chex Quest using this engine during his spare time. Gradually, the project would start becoming bigger and bigger. Jacoby would get some former Digital Cafe members and a few community volunteers to help with the development of this project. The game was also accepted by General Mills, but going off of this Unreal Engine forum post written by Jacoby, it doesn't seem like they were very involved in the early development stage, leading me to assume that at some point Chex Quest HD snowballed into becoming the full-blown promotion for Chex Mix that we have now. So there you have it, Chex Quest HD wasn't ever a serious project and was just kinda made for shits and gigs. Jacoby also stated in an interview with Seriously that unless it was financially supported, he probably won't remake the second episode, because just remaking the first sapped him of a lot of free time that he would have otherwise spent being with friends and family. All stuff that I respect and completely understand. Unfortunately, I still can't look past the flaws that Chex Quest HD has. It just doesn't have very many redeeming qualities and is nowhere near as enjoyable as the first 3 episodes. But despite that, I will say that out of any game I've covered on this show previously, it's kind of refreshing to finally talk about one like Chex Quest, which has such a full and complete legacy. There's some games I've covered here that show genuine potential, but for whatever reason they were just never able to get their wheels off the ground, leaving them in that abandonware limbo where their future is completely uncertain and they're stuck as a sort of digital relic. It's amazing that Chex Quest, a total conversion mod for Doom that was made specifically to advertise Chex cereal, managed to evolve way past just being a cheap marketing gimmick and was able to keep going simply because the fans loved it so much, and Jacoby never really lost his passion for it. It may not seem like we're going to get the second episode for Chex Quest HD or Chex Quest 4, but again, to me that doesn't really matter. What Jacoby and Digital Cafe has given us, I think is enough to let this series rest peacefully, at least for a good long while.